next to a soiled and moss-ridden wall, minding her own business. On her left hand was a small Chinese-made knockoff designer brand handbag, while in between her two fingers on her right hand was a half-consumed Marlboro cigarette. Several tourists passed by, eyeing her with lust and some with disgust. She has grown callous to that kind look. Being treated as dirty is a normal thing for her. She looked beside her and moved a little farther away from the visible urine marks on the wall. She shook her head because she was surprised that the stench of the urine did not bother her. Maybe they were right after all. Maybe she was dirty. She bowed her head and took one sip of her cigarette. In her profession, being subjected to some kind of physical maltreatment is normal. Sometimes, even their lives are on the line. She knows several acquaintances that paid this ultimate price. She used acquaintances because there are no real friends in prostitution. Just competitors, clients, and leeches. She looked at one of the passing Mo, or white foreigners, and smiled. She doesn't know his name, but she's sure that he has been a customer once in a while. She came to Koh Tao, also known to the rest of the world as Turtle Island, full of hope and promises. She paused and smiled as she reminisced about the beauty of the small sandy cove, surrounded by tall and rounded rocks. She remembers the feeling of freedom, especially when she explored the turquoise sea lapping the island. She looked behind her from where she was standing and saw where the hill that she used to climb was located. Standing on top of it are the ocean view bungalows. By now, it has become an unglamorous, functional accommodation that features in abundance at the low end of resorts on the island. A lot has happened since then. Unfortunate circumstances compelled her to enter prostitution. Since then, Koh Tao and its surrounding waters have become her prison that she was afraid that she could never get out of. She was about to take another sip from her cigarette when she noticed something moving on the far side of the wall. She paused for a minute and looked closely at the area. Something moved again. This time, the commotion from surrounding vegetation was more noticeable. "Hello, is there anyone there?" she asked in a rather nervous manner. She was debating in her mind if it was worth the bother if she'd go there and satisfy her curiosity. Nonetheless, there was no debate at all because she had already decided. After all, there was nothing for her to do yet. There were no customers. She took one more sip from her cigarette, after which she threw it on the ground. She made sure that she stepped on it until the embers died out. She started walking in the direction of the movement. She was surprised to see that sitting in the foliage on the far end of the wall was an old woman. She was wearing tattered black clothing and was looking straight at her in a very menacing manner. The stare made her stop walking near the old woman. The woman was crouching, and her hands were touching the soil. "Are you okay, Aunt?" she nervously asked the old woman. The old woman stood up slowly while keeping her eyes glued to the prostitute. "Do you need any help, Auntie? Are you lost?" She slowly backed off as the old woman picked up her pace in approaching her. She could now see the eyes of the old woman. Her eyes were cloudy, as if she was blind with a cataract. The prostitute started running in the opposite direction because the old woman was running toward her in a very threatening manner. Her speed was also out of this world. Unfortunately for the prostitute, the old woman caught up with her and grabbed her with both hands. The girl let off a little shriek before her body was taken over by the thigh pop. A fearful ghost that turns anyone that it has taken over into a raw meat eater. This is a being that not only craves any type of raw meat but also has a special love for human intestines. The last thing that Dokmai felt was a sudden burst of cold air entering her body. Rudy came to me with that day's issue of the Bangkok Post. "Have you seen this?" Rudy asked me as he pointed at one of the stories on the second page of the newspaper. "What's that?" I asked. "It says that a sex worker was killed and mutilated on the island that we're going." Rudy flashed a worried look. "So?" I looked at Rudy, and I could see that he was on edge again. Rudy is the type of person who we call risk averse. He just wants to be in his comfort zone and would never take a risk. "Chill bro, prostitutes get killed all the time no matter where," Jason replied while taking the newspaper from Rudy and throwing it in the trash can. He smiled at me while shaking his head in disapproval of Rudy. "Besides that, we're already almost there." I looked at the window on the starboard side of the ferry and could already see land on the horizon. I was just gonna say that the sex worker was beautiful, Rudy burst out in laughter. This fucker got us there. Jason scratched his head. We all laughed together. A few hours later, the engine of the ferry stopped and we started to disembark. Hello, Koh Tao, here we come, Jason shouted in excitement. Jason is a party animal. It's in his DNA, even way back in our high school days. He's loud and obnoxious. We always get into a bar fight because of him. He is often insensitive and sometimes racist in his remarks. Rudy warned him, "Tone down bro, the locals are looking at you." "I don't care about what those dipshits think, let me enjoy my vacation. I'm going to fuck every woman on this island," he jokingly said, but we know that there's some truth to it. I let him carry our big backpack so he could be busy and he could shut his mouth. "Here, carry all these. Let's go." Before he could take it, a Thai local approached us and offered his help to carry our bags. "That guy may rip our money off," Rudy whispered. "Don't worry, you don't have any money, bro," Jason smiled. "I will just give this guy some change." We let the man carry our backpack until we reached the shore. Then the man offered us some women's escorts. I declined his offer and gave him 100 baht, and he left us scratching his head. "Why did you send him away?" Jason protested. "This is our time to score some exotic Asian woman." "I don't trust that man," Rudy murmured. "He looked like a jerk." "He looks like you, bro," Jason interrupted. We laughed in unison while looking at the beauty of the island. Koh Tao is essentially the prototypical isolated tropical island, with stunning beaches. The island's shores, which include immaculate white sand, swaying palm trees, and glistening blue waters, are among the nicest in all of Thailand. We headed to a resort's hotel entrance where we were greeted with a smile. I realized that locals live up to their country's moniker as the land of 1,000 smiles. However, we were told that our reservation was cancelled. We were given a different room, though. When I got the room key from the front desk crew, she smirked. It was a surreal moment. It was a little creepy. It was intimidating. I will never forget the look on her face. I noticed that the room I was given was not as good as the one I reserved. It was not cleaned very well. The curtains and bedding were old. Jay went out of his room and complained as well. "Bro, I don't like my room. It stinks." We went with him inside his room to check where the bad smell was coming from. Indeed, the stink is suffocating. As soon as we entered Jay's room, Rudy almost vomited. It took us a while, but we found out that the stink was coming from outside his bedroom window. Not far from the foliage in the hotel garden was a bloody lump of decaying meat and dried blood that was being swarmed by hordes of flies. Rudy suddenly ran toward Jay's toilet and vomited. There were hushed reactions and weird looks among the hotel management and staff when we reported what we saw outside of Jason's room. The management apologized and offered Jason another room, but we had enough of the hotel. We decided to leave the hotel. We rented the nearest bungalow on the beach. It has 3 bedrooms, so it suited our needs. It was also clean and offered a good view of the beach. Honestly, I could feel something was wrong with the reaction of the staff. It is as if they are dead scared of what we found out. If you ask me, I would even say that they are afraid for their lives. No one even wanted to go out of the hotel without a companion. Even Jay and Rudy noticed the commotion. I could say that this is not the first time that they have encountered this because of the way they looked at each other. We shared a few beers in the bungalow while sitting outside for some fresh air. We had a few laughs and made some small talk regarding the shitty hotel. Surprisingly, no one said anything about the huge lump of meat that we saw. I dared not even bring it up. "It looks like there is a jinx," Jason noticed that there was something wrong. He was correct. I also felt that something or someone was trying to ruin our vacation. "I told you not to go here," Rudy remarked as he took a big bite of his meal. "Even the food is not good." "Bro, you almost finished the 3rd order of that papaya salad. What do they call that again? Som tam?" Harry teased him. "Here, you could have mine too," he added while laughing. Rudy took his plate and emptied the contents. We went to a bar in the highlands of the island. It's a rustic, nature-inspired establishment. We sat on the solid wooden table on the side of the fence. Several other tourists come and go. However, I can't help but notice that fewer locals are plying the streets. Even in the bar itself, it is as if half of the staff are missing. Those that were serving us were on edge and had a worried look on their faces. Rudy came back from the bar. What the heck? Rudy discovered that his wallet was missing. He was relieved that it did not have his important ID and documents. No worries, it's my treat, I told Rudy. Let's order some Chang beers. I stood up and accompanied him to the bar. Jason laughed and said he'd stay here because the view was amazing while looking at the group of beautiful looking girls at the other table. While waiting for the pitcher of beer, I noticed an old woman in tattered dark clothes on the far right side of the bar. She was standing there looking straight at me. Several tourists and waiters passed by her, but it seems that they were not aware of her presence. She didn't react to those passers-by either. She stood there stone cold, and her stares at me were unwavering. Right at that moment, I felt a great sense of dread. It was as if my life was in danger. I could not explain it, but her stare felt like the stare of death. Rudy tapped me on the shoulder. Are you okay, bud? He glanced in the direction of the old woman. What are you staring at? That old woman has been staring at me the whole time, I pointed at the old woman. What are you talking about? There's nothing there. Rudy shook his head. Bro, it's too early to be drunk, come on, pay this beer, I don't have any money. He motioned me to the cashier. I was about to insist that the old woman was there, but when I glanced back, she was gone. Koh Tao is well known as a diving spot. Scuba diving equipment can be rented from the resort. We also rented a boat so we could experience scuba diving on the island. The boat was 8-seater, so we had to wait for other tourists to fill in and not pay for the whole rental. 2 boatmen and a dive leader accompanied us and led us to the diving spot. We brought our water-resistant smartphone so we could document our dive. We were given a fairly heavy helmet to wear instead of a scuba mask to breathe through. I started first, and the process was simple. I felt as soon as the helmet was on my head that it was pushing me toward the bottom of the ocean. After Rudy and Jay did the same, our guide, a scuba diver, arrived on the scene. But for some reason, the water whined loudly and continuously through the tube. Although it was somewhat inconvenient, it indicated that I was breathing, which was a good thing. However, I heard that my oxygen tank turned off. The sound abruptly ceasing was so terrifying. After approximately 5 seconds, it turned back on, and I was able to breathe once more. I brushed it aside by thinking that they were transferring to a new tank because mine had run out of fuel. After a short while, the guide motioned for me to climb over the railing as he pointed at me. It was easy to become lost because it was difficult to see any peripherals through the masks. To make sure that my buddies followed me and didn't get lost, I turned around and peered behind me. I thought we were all okay because we were making eye contact, so I turned around to continue walking with the guide. He made me travel along a narrow route between 2 corals, so I moved gently to avoid cutting my legs on the corals. It was difficult because of the strong underwater current, my cumbersome helmet, and sporadic tugs from the oxygen tube. My heart stopped once more as I approached the guide. Like the other 2 occasions, I rationalized that it was unimportant and carried on. I told myself, don't freak out, as I threaded the line into the water. I suddenly panicked because I saw what looked like the old woman from the bar under the water. Her hair was floating with the water current. Her eyes were closed as if she was sleeping or, at worst, dead. I also noticed that she doesn't have any diving equipment with her. I was about to swim to her to save her when she opened her eyes and looked straight into mine. Then she grinned. I forced myself to stop taking increasingly rapid breaths since I knew that was the worst thing I could do. I turned to face the diving guide and began hitting my chest with my fist, which is a sign for I can't breathe. He appeared to notice and turned to go. Only one hope remained for me, that he was escorting me to the boat. I noticed that I was breathing in less and less oxygen and that water was increasingly filling up my helmet. To get the tiny bit of air I had to gaze up. I gripped the guide's arm to make sure I didn't lose him and to let him know how serious the situation was. When I spotted the boat's ladder, I realized that getting there was all I needed to do to survive. I grabbed the ladder and pulled myself to the dive boat. Dude, we were trained to dive, Rudy said, anxiously helping me remove my diving gear. "What happened? You seem terrified there," said Jason, who was also waiting for me on the boat. "I am alright," I said as I held my head. "Did you see an old woman down there?" "It's just us down there plus our guide," Rudy answered. "This is the second time you asked me if I saw an old woman," and Jason looked at me with concern. I held my head and lay down on the deck of the boat. "Wake me up when we get to shore," I said as I closed my eyes. Rudy woke me as we neared the shore. I saw a lot of people on the beach. But there was someone that caught my attention. The same old woman was beside a coconut tree. She was standing still and looking intently at our boat. No, she was not looking at the boat, she was looking at me. I almost collapsed in dread. Why do I keep seeing this old woman? Why am I so terrified when she's around? What does she want with me? These are all the questions that I intend to find out. I have decided to confront the old woman when we go to shore. The locals were gathered around someone lying on the sand. Someone drowned. The victim's eyes were open and his tongue was out. We unloaded the boat one by one. Jason looked at the victim. "That was the porter that helped us carry our backpack," Jay murmured. "It looked like he was strangled. He could be drunk, according to the diving guide," Rudy explained. "Let's go and take a rest." I looked at the old woman's location again. I intended to talk to her, but she was gone. We retired to our rooms for a nap. I got half naked, and I went to sleep. Because there was no clock in the room, I can't recall the exact time, but I do recall feeling someone was pulling at my hair at some point in the afternoon when I was just mildly sleeping. I was certain that someone was pestering me. I thought it was Rudy or Jason. I opened my eyes and looked around, but they were not in my room. I recall becoming enraged and then being abruptly pushed halfway out of bed. I awoke with my face and hands on the floor, but my waist was still on the bed. What's happening to me? Am I sleepwalking? I sat up and shook it off. I was just probably having a dream. I stood up to use the restroom. I had the weirdest impression that something wicked was in the room when I returned. I can't explain it. I tried to sleep again, but not more than 5 minutes after I closed my eyes. To my horror, I had been hurled out of bed. The damn bed suddenly rose off the floor. I had a terrible sense of impending doom and evil in the room as I looked at the floating bed. A horrible female voice was laughing and slapping the top of my head while messing with my hair. The bed then crashed to the ground from its right front corner. Then another corner would fall on the wooden floor before rising once again. My fear had me utterly frozen in place. I fled from my room and barged into Rudy's room. I saw him sleeping and was oblivious that I was there. I heard some movements from Jason's room, so I went there and asked him to check my room. I was behind him when we entered the room. I was very jumpy and lost all my nerves. When we entered the room, everything seemed normal. "You might just be tired," Jay tapped on my shoulders. "There's a beach party starting at midnight." Jay might be right. I have only had a few hours of sleep in the last 48 hours. I noticed, however, that the bed left markings on the floor. I was so confused and didn't know what to think at this point. That's when Jay tapped me on the head and told me to be ready for dinner. Syri Beach felt quite different that night than it did in the afternoon. Although the location is the same, the vibe has changed. The incident with the drowned man left no traces whatsoever. The midday crowds of couples, families, walking tourists, and birds stealing unguarded food were long gone. Several campfires lit up the beach, which illuminated it. There could be 100 people on the beach. Shirtless men and women in bikinis were strewn all over the place, almost on top of one another. Some were dancing to the loud sounds coming from the resort. Some were drinking their favorite drinks. We approached a group of women who were dancing near the campfire. Thai women are usually shy. We're not new to the party scene. We instantly knew that these locals were not partygoers but prostitutes. I made eye contact with one of the lovely ladies, and she smiled at me, so I approached them. They told me that their names were Dokmai, Kamlai, and Kiane. They were wearing skin-tight shiny clothing. Their clothes were above their knees. They were all in their early 20s. Jason and Rudy gave me an evil stare when they saw me dancing with the women. "Bro, I thought we were friends," Jason commented as they approached us. Rudy was holding a bottle of whiskey in a shot glass. He poured the drink and gave it to Kiane. She took the wine glass and smiled. She drank it and asked for more. Jason whispered to Dokmai. Then, they headed to his room. I was laughing as both Jason and Dokmai left to go back to our bungalow. I was supposed to say hell yeah, but I was taken aback when I saw Dokmai's appearance change into an old woman for a brief second. She looked back at me with that scary grin on her face. I quickly stood up and tried to warn Jason, but he didn't want to hear any of it. Kamlai held my right arm and persuaded me to leave them alone. She pulled me by the elbow and asked me to go near the beach. I was uneasy because I knew that Jason was in danger. I apologized to Kamlai, and I quickly ran to follow Dokmai and Jason. When I arrived outside of Jason's room, I could hear the bed creaking and Dokmai laughing. I opened the door to his room. Jason was lying in bed, half naked. Dokmai was sitting on his chest. I called out to Jason, but he was ignoring me. He was looking straight into the ceiling as if in a trance. Dokmai suddenly looked at me and licked her lips. I stood there, not knowing what to do. She started licking Jason's body while keeping her eyes locked on mine. Something tells me at the back of my mind that she's not doing it for pleasure, but rather she was tasting Jason's flesh. Dokmai laughed once more. I remembered that laugh. It was familiar. It sounded like the same thing when I was pushed off my bed. Dokmai suddenly stood up. Her appearance changed to that of the old woman that I saw on the shore. Her hair looked the same as the one I encountered under the water. She smirked, which made me recall the crew from the hotel. She clicked her tongue, and all of a sudden I was in a trance. I can't move, yet I'm perfectly aware of what's happening around me. She was controlling me. She did not want me to move. I could still think, but I could not speak. I could see Jason still lying down. Then, he stood up upon the order of the old woman. She clicked her tongue again. Jason started banging his head on the wall. Soon, Jason's blood started dropping on the floor. The old woman suddenly went into a frenzy. She got into Jason's back and started chewing on his neck. Her eyes completely turned red while she bit a huge chunk of flesh from my friend, who was still banging his head on the wall. This went on for a few minutes and was only interrupted when Jason dropped dead on the floor. Then the old woman faced me and clicked her tongue again. I found myself banging my head on the wall too. I could hear the rhythm of the sound of my head hitting the wall. I was getting dizzy and passed out. I woke up being tended to by 2 resort medics. Rudy was pacing back and forth with a dreadful look on his face. He knelt next to me as soon as he saw me open my eyes. "Is he okay?" he asked the paramedics. The latter nodded. "Can I talk to him?" he asked again and got the same reply. "Dude, you and Jason were attacked by an animal, probably a tiger. Do you remember any of that?" he asked me. I tried to talk, but I felt that my head was going to explode. So I just moved my head a little bit. Rudy placed his hand on his chest. "Bad news bro, Jason is dead," he was crying now. The animal chewed his head off. The animal ran off with his intestines. I was speechless as tears ran through my eyes. I spent a few days in the hospital until I felt that my head was already okay. I requested to be dismissed from the hospital. The doctors and nurses did a thorough test before allowing me to check out. I heard from the nurses that Jason's body was repatriated back to the US. Our vacation turned into a tragedy. I thought the string of unfortunate events was over, but I could never be so wrong. I was preparing my bags when I received a phone call from my brother Jerome. "Why are you using my credit card without my permission?" he angrily asked. "How did you know?" I asked my elder brother. He was fuming. The credit card company called me and verified if I was using my credit card in a foreign country. He paused for a second and continued, "How could you spend a vacation using my money?" "Bro, I'm going to pay you later anyway," I defended myself. "How could you pay me if you don't even have a regular job?" he shouted. "You have spent a fortune in just 1 week of staying there." "I brought my friends with me," I explained. "I just want to visit Thailand with my friends." "What, you are using my money to treat your friends in Thailand?" he asked. I thought you would be canceling the credit card anyway, I mentioned. So it's better to avail of it. Jerome's voice was still at a high pitch. I will still have to pay for the debts that you incurred using that card. I have already canceled that credit card, so you won't be able to use it. Wait, I still need to buy our ticket back home, I begged him. Please make the card usable. My brother murmured as he disconnected the call. You are so selfish, you are not even helping our parents. My chest was on fire, and the area around me was seemingly divided. Nobody else could be found. Nothing else existed. The only thing outside of me that I was hostile towards was the image of my hated brother. Sharper lines began to appear in the vision, and beyond them there was nothing. I felt a stubbornness in my fingertips that felt like hot spikes crawling beneath my skin. I was aware of it as I was consumed by hate. It was a little after 6 when I arrived back outside our bungalow. I was surprised to see Rudy on the beach staring at the waves. I was surprised because all the while I thought that he had already left Thailand together with Jason's remains. After all, I did not see him in the hospital. He never visited, not even once. Rudy, I called out to him. But he didn't respond or acknowledge my presence. I started walking down the beach to talk to him about the incident. Because of the trauma in my head, I'm not sure what happened. Maybe he could shed some light because he's the one who found us and called the police. Bro, I touched his shoulder. As soon as I did, I knew immediately that something was wrong with my friend. He's unresponsive. He had blank stares even when I nudged him. Then I shook his shoulder. He looked at me and grinned. It was the same expression that I now know all too well. I quickly let go of him and I ran towards our bungalow and locked all the doors and windows. I was shaking and panicking. I saw the old woman in Rudy's eyes. I was still not fully healed from my injuries, so I got tired fast. I tried to barricade every door and window, but I quickly lost my strength. In the end, I was forced just to sit down and wait for what was coming. I was very terrified, yet I was helpless. I was afraid that what happened to Jason would happen to me. I was shaking and perspiring when I heard a commotion outside our bungalow. I could hear tables and chairs outside moving. It is as if someone is throwing them around. I almost had a heart attack when one of the chairs crashed into one of the windows. I braced myself and tried to find something to defend myself with. The best I could come up with is a floor map. I hurriedly tore the handle and threw the rest on the floor. My hand kept shaking as I pointed the floor map handle at the broken window. In Thailand, a Phai Pop is a spirit that is said to be capable of possessing and taking over its victim. It is said that once your body has been occupied, you will have symptoms like a mental disorder. The victims are said to have an unquenchable thirst for flesh. The spirit usually manifests itself as a half-blind old woman. I was pointing at the window using the floor map handle when the face of the old woman suddenly appeared, intently looking at me. It was the same old woman that I've been constantly seeing because I could not have mistaken her cataract-laden eyes. She smiled when she saw me, pissed on my pants in fear. I cried and started hitting her face, but the severe shaking of my hands prevented me from hitting her face accurately. Instead, I kept hitting the window. She laughed, mocking me in her dialect. I kept warning her not to go near me. She started climbing the broken window by going in head first. I took the opportunity to hit her head with my stick. It didn't do much because she kept coming. In desperation, I threw the stick at her and retreated into my room. When I opened the door to my room, Rudy was standing in front of the bed, pointing at something. What the hell? Just now you're on the beach. How did you get here? I didn't get a response from him. I ignored it because I was thinking that the old woman was after me. I need to get inside the room fast. I quickly ran inside the room and pushed Rudy out of the way. The door slammed shut as I entered. A woman's voice suddenly laughed from behind the door. To my absolute horror, it was Dok Mai. She was the prostitute that killed Jason. She had been hiding there all along. I slowly backed away from her. I stepped on Rudy, who was on the floor, in the process. I quickly grabbed his arm and tried to drag him with me. He was still in a vegetative trance-like state. Dok Mai started walking up to me. In the blink of an eye, she suddenly turned into the old woman in dark tattered clothes. As she inched closer to me, With every step she changed her appearance to become a different person. All that she had attached herself to in the past. I saw a different woman and even men. I was pinned in the corner with nowhere left to go. I prepared for the worst. There is nothing left for me to do but to stay motionless. That's when I heard her tongue flicking. I could not move my body on my own, but I could see her. I could think and hear, but I could not speak. She raised her hands, revealing her sharp nails. She rushed towards me at a frightening speed. Before I could react, I felt a cold gush of air enter my body. Then there was darkness. I woke up laying on the bed facing Rudy, who was awake and was looking at me terrified as if he had seen a ghost or something morbid at my face. I tried to move, but I could barely do so. I tried to talk, but whenever I would move even slightly, Rudy would cringe and shake violently. He was terrified of something that I'm not aware of. Was it something behind me? Is it the old woman or Dok Mai, perhaps? I shiver at the thought of any of them standing behind me with a knife or sword ready to end our lives at any moment. With all my might, I managed to look behind me. To my relief, neither the old woman nor Dok Mai was there. Could it be that they're gone? Was our nightmare over? I shifted my gaze to Rudy, who shook and tried to move away from me immediately. He was shaking his head, terrified. I don't understand, I finally managed to say. What's wrong? I asked. But with my every word and movement, Rudy would quiver. I noticed the pungent liquid all over my face. Luckily, I could move my head now. I was able to shift my position and look around the bed. The whole bed was wet. It was sticky and slippery at the same time. "Bud," I said to Rudy. And he replied with groans and tears. What happened to us? I honestly don't remember anything after I blacked out. Slowly, I managed to move my hands. I tried to reach out to Rudy, but he cried profusely. As soon as he did so, blood flowed from his mouth. Chunks of flesh that looked like part of his tongue fell off the bed. I was shocked at what I had just seen. Yet, I was intrigued. I couldn't take my eyes off the flesh. It's so fresh and juicy that I can't help but wonder how it tastes. At the same time, I was feeling a sense of ecstasy, especially since I can now fully move my body. I pushed myself to a sitting position on the bed and managed to get the whole picture. Rudy's blood was the pungent liquid on the bed and my face. Precious sweet liquid that slowly leaves Rudy's frail body. He was quivering and shaking violently. He was wide-eyed, staring at me, begging for my mercy. Unfortunately for him, none was forthcoming. I picked up the portion of his tongue that fell from his mouth and placed it in my mouth and began to chew. I closed my eyes and enjoyed every minute of it. I have an insatiable thirst for more. However, as I observed, Rudy was already half consumed. His limbs are already gone. I'm surprised that he's still alive. Rudy started shouting and crying as soon as he saw that I started eating part of his tongue. He was barely hanging on to his frail life now. I could see that his eyes were beginning to roll on top, eventually hiding his pupil. He convulsed one last time as his spirit left his body. I grinned because there was only one thing on my mind now. I wonder what his innards would taste like?